morning and welcome back to Football League World TV. Final show of the week, which means it's time for the weekend preview. We're going to be looking ahead to 6 games across the AFL this coming weekend. I'm your host, Alfie Burns, and I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague, Marcus. Marcus, how are you this morning?
Yeah, very well. Thanks, Alfie. Got to draw some interesting conclusions and less so about other teams in the first weekend. So, yeah, looking forward to seeing how those hold up in this weekend's action.
Yeah, the season's still at an infant stage, but plenty to talk about. We're streaming across Facebook, YouTube and Twitter this morning, so anybody joining us want to get their thoughts in the comments. We want some score predictions as well from you about the games that we're discussing. So please do get yourself in the comments. We'll look to get your comments up on the show and discuss them as well. As we always do then, we'll kick things off with the Championship, Marcus. First game on the agenda, Norwich versus Wigan, which takes place tomorrow. I think that's a lunchtime kickoff in the Championship. A defeat for Norwich last week at Cardiff. How important is it for Dean Smith that he gets a response from his side back at Carrow Road?
Very significant for me. I know it's at an early stage and, yeah, it would feel strange to be putting pressure on a manager sort of going into the second weekend of the season. But I think the way that last season panned out, Smith did have a large chunk of the Premier League season after Daniel Farke was dismissed to try and get a tune out of the squad and wasn't really able to. So going into this second tier campaign, it feels like there was a bit of ill feeling from the fan base, maybe a lack of confidence given what happened last term, and all of those concerns really came to fruition in their performance at Cardiff City last weekend. That said, there's an argument that they didn't really deserve to lose the game. It was a bit of a fortunate goal for the Bluebirds, and apart from that, they didn't really concede many chances. They were able to limit Cardiff to precious little on their home patch, but going forward, it was really worrying, to be honest. You look at the names on that team sheet, the likes of Todd Cantwell, Timu Pukki, and other players that have been really successful at this level before, and sort of the main chance they mustered was something of a snapshot from Kenny McLean from a short corner routine. So yeah, a lot to prove going into this weekend and the first match at Carrow Road. I feel like obviously it should be a good atmosphere, first home game of the season, but I feel like fans might be slightly on edge and there could be frustrations voiced quite early on in the match if it doesn't go Norwich's way. So yeah, it's an exciting chance for Wigan in that respect to potentially upset the odds and the home crowd from an early stage.
It was a low-scoring weekend last weekend, and one goalless draw was between Wigan and Preston. Wigan then heading to Norwich. They had 20 shots on goal last week against Preston and didn't manage to put one of those chances away. Despite the sort of pressure that we're discussing on Norwich, Wigan are going to have to be a lot more ruthless to get something at Carrow Road. Would you agree with that, Marcus?
Definitely, yeah. It was a positive defensive performance from Norwich despite the disappointing score last weekend. And Wigan, it felt like were more strong defensively than they were very exciting going forward in their League One title win last season. It looks like that might carry on heading into this season with the sort of difficulties they had breaking down Preston at times last weekend. That said, I do have a lot of faith in their backline and their defensive process under Liam Richardson that they will be able to keep it competitive against one of the outright favourites for the Championship on their travels. So there's a positive in that respect. I can see probably quite a fairly low margin game playing out with Norwich lacking a bit of confidence. But yeah, if Wigan can produce a performance and create the same amount of chances they are able to against Preston, I think they fancy themselves to at least pick up a point.
Let's get your prediction for this game then quickly, Marcus.
So I'm going to go for a 1-0 Norwich win. I think they're going to have to grind this one out, maybe a late goal. We're going to play them well, obviously finish the season so strongly and then gave a really good account of themselves against a Preston side that many people are seeing as potential dark horses to compete for a playoff spot. So, yeah, I think Norwich have just got a better squad, better options from the bench, which I think comes into it way more now. Dean Smith can use 5 substitutions. So I think potentially a frustrating afternoon for Canaries fans with some kind of relief coming in the form of a late goal and a narrow 1-0 win.
Yeah, I predicted Norwich to win last week against Cardiff, but looking at their last 2 starts in the Championship, they have been slow starters. So I'm going to go for that to kind of continue this weekend, and I'm going to go for Wigan to pick up a decent point, really. I'll go for a 1-1. Heading up to Yorkshire then to preview the next Championship fixture, Sheffield United versus Millwall. Bramall Lane was a fortress last season for Paul Heckingbottom and Sheffield United. They need that again this season, don't they, Marcus, if they're going to be promotion contenders?
Yeah, it's going to be enormous. Heckingbottom deserves a lot of credit for the way that he sort of got that going last season. I think even when he speaks to the media, he loves pointing towards how important a role the fans play, which I think is very refreshing and great to see. And it's something that the Blades really lost in their 2020-21 campaign when they're relegated from the Premier League with no fans in the ground. And it's something that's going to be huge for them this season, because I think amongst the teams that are favourites to go on and compete for automatic promotion in the Championship, I don't think the Blades' squad is quite as good. But if they can be as ruthless, particularly at Bramall Lane, as they were in the second half of last season, then they're definitely going to be in and around it. Obviously, a lot's been made of the loss of Morgan Gibbs-White going back to his parent club, and that kind of his absence was clear for all to see in their loss at Watford in the opening game. But I am a big fan of Iliman and Jai, and I think if they can get players back to full fitness in the coming weeks, then they should be able to be an intimidating team in the attacking third as well. So yeah, I'm sure this one will be a great atmosphere. The Blades had to wait all the way to Monday night to get their season up and running. But I think playing a Millwall side who I think did the double over them last season should give them plenty of appetite to take revenge.
Yeah, it was defeat for Sheffield United at Watford on Monday night. So the need for a reaction at Bramall Lane is quite important here. Millwall, though, they were off to a flyer last weekend, beating Stoke City. For Gary Rowett's side, they feel, for me, like they're going to be in contention for a spot in the playoffs this season. But this is maybe a test of their promotion credentials quite early in the season, would you say, Marcus?
Yeah, I would say so. I think they take a point now if you offered it to them. I'm probably not as high on Millwall as many people seem to be. I think it was a really poor Stoke City performance at the Den last weekend. Obviously, both goals coming from set pieces as well. I'm not sure how much you can read into that. And I think losing Jed Wallace, even though they've made some impressive signings, at least in the short term, is going to make them worse off going forward until we see the likes of Zion Fleming get up to speed in English football. So, yeah, I expect them to be there or thereabouts this season to at least flirt with the top six on occasion. But yeah, at the moment, I'm still a little bit hesitant to be really bullish about their chances. A 1-0 loss at Cambridge United in midweek as well, George Honeyman being sent off. And it was quite a strong side that Rowett fielded there, probably sort of like half second string, half first string. So be interesting to see sort of if he's going to rotate from that, or yeah, whether you can tell there's some miles in their legs, of course, in such a cauldron atmosphere at Bramall Lane. So yeah, it's going to be a good barometer to see exactly where they're at. I think a draw would be a very impressive result.
Let's get your prediction for this one then, Marcus.
I am going 1-0 Sheffield United, another 1-0 home win. Obviously, yeah, did not convince in the final third at Vicarage Road, but that's a really tough start to the season. And when they were starting players like Dennis Sarr and Joao Pedro in that front three, it's not a defeat that makes me too concerned about their chances this season. So, yeah, I think a very intimidating home atmosphere can push the Blades over the line to get their first win in the season.
Yeah, I think we might see a little bit more of an attack-minded side from Paul Heckingbottom this weekend back at Bramall Lane. So I'll go for a home win as well. I'll go a little bit more convincing and 2-0. Final Championship game we're going to look at then is Burnley versus Luton. Impressive start to the season for Burnley last week against Huddersfield. Some really slick football played by Vincent Kompany's side. But the Burnley boss is very aware of how this challenge against Luton is different. He wanted an assessment of his side after they'd played their opening 3 fixtures, which he felt were very tough against Huddersfield, Luton, and then Watford, I think it is. So on this game in isolation, Marcus, do you think that Luton are going to allow Burnley the type of time and that kind of thing to play the type of football that they want?
Definitely not. It's a completely different test. It's going to be exciting to see how the Clarets come through it. Luton's approach is going to be completely different out of possession to the way that we saw Huddersfield sit back and kind of concede possession and let Burnley keep the ball last Friday. So it's going to be interesting to see how if Burnley have the capability to play through that press, because I'm sure that's the way Nathan Jones is going to look to impose his side on them. We saw Luton sort of start the season much slower than they ended it last season. And obviously a 0-0 draw at home to Birmingham isn't too convincing to begin the campaign. So I think they're kind of feeling their way in, trying to build some confidence after losing out in the playoffs last season. But yeah, it's a really tough ask. And the contrast of styles is going to be really interesting to watch. Obviously, there's these players that made outstanding debuts at the John Smith Stadium, and it's a completely different test altogether. So first home game for Vincent Kompany at Turf Moor as well. So it's going to be a very interesting one to monitor.
How much of a just sort of throw this question at you, Marcus? How much of a sort of impact do you think that the crowd at Turf Moor will have for Burnley this season? Do you think it'll be important to Kompany?
Definitely, yeah. Obviously, they're going to be playing the ball forward a lot slower than they were under Sean Dyche. So that takes some patience, and football fans aren't sort of famously that patient. So I can see Burnley going into, given the way they started, potentially even every home game this season as favourites if they can continue the way they've started. So that could cause some frustration if teams are stubborn, and it is going to be seen as one of the sort of big occasion away days with Burnley coming down after 6 seasons in the top flight. So they're going to have to be realistic. I think it is. They didn't make it look like it, but it is something of a transition to completely change up the way they're playing under Kompany. Obviously, a lot of different players come in as well to try and make that change. But I think Burnley's home crowd has had a great impact for them in the Premier League over the years. I see no reason why it would be any different in the Championship, but they need to be aware that it's going to be a very different style of football than the more direct approach that they saw under Dyche.
Let's get your prediction for this one then, Marcus.
So I'm going for a third straight home win, 2-1 Burnley. I do think the Clouds will concede their first goal of the season, but there's just too much quality. They created so many chances against Huddersfield, and I think Luton are maybe a little bit worse off defensively than they were last season, still yet to replace Cal Naismith in that back line. I'm very enthusiastic about the striking duo of Carlton Morris and Elijah Adebayo, so I can see them opening their account for the season. But I think Burnley might just have too much for them on the day. 2-1.
Yeah, very different test this for Burnley to what Huddersfield threw up last week. I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw here. I felt that Burnley did, despite how well they played, did have a lack of cutting edge last week, and I think that might just hinder them a little bit this weekend against a good Luton side. So I'm backing a 1-1 draw here. Moving down into League One then, the first game we're going to look at is Barnsley versus Cheltenham. It was a tough start as Barnsley boss for Michael Duff last weekend with a 1-0 loss to a very good Plymouth side. It's got to be said, this is a presentable game on paper for Barnsley in Cheltenham, but Michael Duff facing his old side. Is there a case to say, Marcus, that he would have probably preferred this game not to be coming second up in the season?
I think so, definitely. He definitely would have thought about it as those sort of contract talks dragged on between him leaving the Robins to go to the Tykes. Their first fixture, the loss at Plymouth, was a match where I felt like I didn't really learn too much about Barnsley. They had some good moments, some not so good moments, and Argyle, of course, are a very good side in League One. It was quite odd to see Callum Styles playing in the third tier, a player with ability way above the level. If they can keep him maybe just even till January, I think that could have a very positive impact on their season. It's still a bit of a transition period. I think there will be a hangover. The amount of games that Barnsley lost last season, I think they picked up just 30 points in 46 games. So there is going to be have to be some patience there. Cheltenham, obviously, high scoring defeat, 2-0 up at half time. It was almost a dream start for Wade Elliott in the dugout, and then ended up losing 3-2 at home to Posh. But I definitely took way more positives than negatives from that performance to Cheltenham. I think, Peterborough are going to score 3 or more goals quite a lot this season. And they were able to create chances at will, even in the second half. I think Lucas Bergstrom had a great debut on loan at the Posh from Chelsea that sort of ensured that they got the away win. So, yeah, it's almost a bit of a nightmare one for Duff. His first home game is going to be tough for him to get settled. Might get some kind of sarcastic banter from the away fans. Of course, he is a bit of a Cheltenham legend for the job that he did there, taking them from the bottom end of League Two to mid-table in League One. But no, it's a really enticing encounter. It's going to be interesting to see how they get on because, yeah, as I said, in the defeat at Plymouth, a couple of players looked bright, but it was hard to get a handle on exactly what Barnsley are going to look like this season after that match.
As you touched on, when it comes to Cheltenham, there were quite a lot of positives in the way that they approached their game with Peterborough last weekend, even though they lost and blew a 2-goal lead. Wade Elliott, what an opportunity for him going up against his former boss in Michael Duff. He's going to be more motivated than ever to get a result here, isn't he?
Yeah, sometimes sort of external context like this can make games a bit more fiery, a bit more of a leveler. Cheltenham are a team that have been leaving everything out there. Duff got every last drop out of that squad that he could to get them to finish 15th, I think it was, last season. I don't see that approach changing at all. Under Wade Elliott, obviously have one of the biggest goal threats in the division in Alfie May, so it will definitely be one that Duff will have a plan for. That they'll be right up for this one. I'm sure that the fans will be relishing the trip to Oakwell. The pressure it's a nice situation as well in the sense that the pressure's all on Barnsley. Their first home game weren't able to pick up a win in the first match. So yeah, it's a nice first away game for Wade Elliott in the sense that the pressure will be on his former colleague Duff, but yeah, that there'll be certainly things that he would have wanted to address after the way they let Posh back into that game last week. But yeah, they should be able to impose themselves on the match, given the promise that they showed, at least in their first game.
Let's get your prediction here then, Marcus.
I'm going for another 3-2 defeat for Cheltenham. I think this could be a bit of a ding-dong battle once again. I thought Jack Aitchison looked really bright for Barnsley last weekend. Had a decent loan spell at Forest Green Rovers, I believe it was, last season. I think maybe he could be one to open his account. As I mentioned, Callum Styles still in the team is a real luxury at this level. So something of a fiery atmosphere and plenty of goals. I think Cheltenham are possibly going to be one of those sides this season that are decent entertainers and potentially end up towards the bottom end as well. So I'm going for another 3-2 defeat for them and Barnsley to get up and running.
Yeah, you've taken the words right out of my mouth there with regard to a bit of a girl fest here. Well, I'm going to go for a 2-2 draw with Cheltenham, just about getting their first point on the board this weekend. MK Dons versus Sheffield Wednesday up next. Last season's 2 beaten playoff semi-finalists. Not the best start to the season for either of these sides. MK beginning with a defeat to Cambridge, whilst Sheffield Wednesday had their own goal fest with Portsmouth, a 3-3 draw at Hillsborough. What are you expecting from this game, Marcus?
I'm expecting an improved performance from Wednesday. It was pretty worrying defensively at times, where Pompey, causing them so many problems with balls into the box, and it is a new defensive contingent. I think Ben Hennigan and Michael Ahikwe making their debuts alongside Dominic Iorfa in the back three last weekend, and Faseo Deli Bashiru really dug them out of trouble in the end. Wednesday did the double over MK last season, which I think could play on the minds of the players a little bit and give the Owls a little bit more confidence going into the match. And MK, although it was only a 1-0 loss at a Cambridge side that loved to upset the odds under Mark Bonner, it was a pretty concerning performance, to be honest. It was clear that there was a lot of players in that side that are still sort of getting used to the way Liam Manning wants them to play, how demanding he is in possession. And I think that's potentially a transition that could take longer than with Wednesday, who have bought players with sort of more experience at the level and who could maybe slot into that team more easily under Darren Moore. I don't think it's an as complex system. Scoring 3 goals has to be a positive. If they can cut down on those defensive errors, then I see no reason why they can't get a positive result. The losses of Scott Twine and Harry Darling would hurt potentially even every club outside of the Premier League, let alone just League One. So yeah, I think there's definitely going to be a transition period with MK bringing in a lot of new signings, younger players as well as they like to. So I'm feeling quite positive about Sheffield Wednesday going into this one. Yeah, I think they can cut out those errors. There's just too many good players, too many leaders on that team sheet to put in another disappointing display for me.
Let's get your prediction then, Marcus.
So I'll go for 2-1 Sheffield Wednesday. It was this fixture last season where Bannon scored at the goal of the season. I think maybe he could chip in with some decisive contributions as well. I think MK's still getting up to speed. So yeah, Wednesday to pick up a win, 2-1.
Yeah, I'm expecting a little bit more control from Darren Moore's side this week after last weekend sort of end-to-end game with Portsmouth. So I'll go with an away victory as well. I think it'll be, really tight game, but 1-0 Sheffield Wednesday. Finally, then, we're going to brush over League Two. The fixture that I've selected to talk about is Hartlepool versus AFC Wimbledon. Two sides that had contrasting starts to the season last weekend. Hartlepool were absolutely smashed by Walsall, 4-0. They're back on home turf. How do you think they're going to react, Marcus?
Well, the jury's out completely on Paul Hartley, given his background, and it was a really worrying first game of the season. 4-0, they lose the shot count 21-4 against a Walsall side that were very inconsistent last season, even after Michael Flynn went into the dugout. I was surprised, to be honest, to see them part company with Graham Lee last season. I thought he did a decent job following on from Dave Challoner. Definitely seemed to have the fans on side as well. So to go with a left fielder replacement and then with their recruitment as well was a little bit risky. I think they'll struggle to hit the sort of heights of mid-table that they did last season. And it's a really good opportunity for Wimbledon to go back-to-back after picking up their first win of 2022 last weekend. Bit of new manager momentum as well there under Johnny Jackson. So it's a really long away trip. You tend to get the enthusiasm from fans maybe a little bit more for that at the beginning of the campaign. So yeah, I'm probably fancying Wimbledon a little bit more for this one because it was just so desperately poor from the Pools last weekend.
Let's talk about Wimbledon then. And I know they're stepping down a division, but what a morale boost last weekend will have been with that sort of rare victory. They were 2-0 winners against Gillingham.
Yeah, it was enormous. The Gills had quite a positive last few months of the season, even though they ended up getting relegated. I think when Neil Harris took over, they were 10 points from safety, and he did get them out of the relegation zone at one point. So to play a fellow relegated team on the first weekend of the season is a nice test to sort of see where you're at compared to the other teams dropping into that lead. So to get the victory was really positive and definitely one that the Jackson would have been keen to get out the way and not let it drag on any longer than it needed to. I feel really good about their front two in Ayub Assar and Josh Davison. I think Assar is probably one of the, if not the best creative player in the division, so versatile and able to play in and around a central front man. I think what Josh Davison offers maybe outside the finishing touch, his relentless work rate, is decent in the air, can hold the ball up really well, could help some of Wimbledon's other attacking players. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how they get on first on the road. Obviously, they want to get that one out of the way as well. It's been a long time since they had an away victory. But that front two in particular really excites me, and the morale in the group as well should be quite high after getting off to the perfect start.
Yeah, feels quite strange to say this, but there's a sense of optimism around Wimbledon, despite them only winning once this calendar year. Let's get your prediction then, Marcus.
I'm going 2-1 Wimbledon. I was tempted to go for a little bit more of a comfortable victory, but I think maybe there could be still some scarring and some tendencies to get a little bit nervous as maybe a win gets closer. So I can see Hartlepool coming back into that one, but I'm going to go 2-1.
Yeah, I'm going to echo your thoughts there. I fancy a 2-1 Wimbledon win. That concludes our look at the weekend's coming fixtures. Then, thanks to anybody that's joined us across Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And thanks to you as well, Marcus, for joining me. Coming up on Football League World TV next week, we'll be looking back on the EFL's action as well as looking ahead to what's to come next weekend. And I'm sure there'll be plenty of discussion around the League Cup as well, which kicks off midweek next week. So plenty to tune in for, so please do join us again. But between now and then, take care and enjoy a weekend full of EFL action.